Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, an entitled Karen thinks that she is entitled to parking in my driveway. She claims my property should belong to her and thus she always parks where she wants. Even when we blocked her out, she did not stop and ended up trying to run me over. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. So this woman that lives next to me acts the way that people describe a Karen. She is entitled and thinks the entire world exists just to revolve around her. The only thing that might not match is the generic Karen look. I think that look is meant really for just Karens in America, because here we don't really see Karens looking like they do on the other side of the world. Personality-wise though, she has it nailed and I ended up at my wit's end with her. So I have a driveway in my home and Karen has a tendency to randomly park in it without any kind of permission. I have told her many times that it is my driveway and I need the space for my own car. She told me that she cannot park on the street because her car is very expensive, and since I drive a cheap car, that means she should get to use my driveway. No matter how many times I have told this woman no, it never seems to get through her head. Now, one day things got a little more intense and that's the story I want to share with you. So I decided that I was gonna make it that Karen cannot park in my driveway anymore. I needed something to block it, aka restrict access for when the car was not in the driveway. We got one car and my husband takes it to work, which is usually when Karen moves in to steal it. Meaning steal the spot. When the car gets taken out of the driveway, we replace it by putting a couple of cement blocks in the way. We don't have a gate or fence because it is just not viable with the way the land is, and Karen obviously was angry at being blocked in and instead of giving up decided to do something even worse. She pulled her car up and parked it right in the middle of our front yard. I managed to see her do it and ran outside to yell at her before she even had a chance to step out of her car door. I could not be patient with her and decided if she wanted to act like a Karen, I could act nasty right back to her. I believed that if she was not gonna give me any respect, then she did not deserve any from me. Me? Get your car off my yard now! Karen, this is what you get from blocking me from the driveway. Karen, the driveway belongs to me and my husband, not you. Karen, there's no way I'm parking my car on the street when I can use your driveway instead. If you want to make things difficult, I will leave my car here. Me, this is your last warning. If I see your car on my property again, I am calling and getting it towed away. I am done playing this stupid game with you. Karen, how dare you threaten me and my car? You need to learn your place. She turned on her car and I thought I won and she was driving away, but instead she backed off of my property as if she was leaving and then changed gears to go forward. She stepped on the gas and drove towards me. I had to run out of the way and she barely missed hitting me before leaving my property and driving down the road. I was shocked and terrified that she had just tried to kill me by running me over with her car. I knew she was entitled, but I had no idea that she was this crazy and willing to do things like this. I called my husband at work and he told me to stay in the house and he was gonna come home early. It turns out at some point between her trying to kill me and him coming home, she left a note by our door. The note basically said that she hopes I learned my lesson and that if I messed with her again, she would not go so easy on me again. I was scared, but the next day when I saw the cement blocks gone and her car in the driveway, I had enough. I had her car towed and an hour later she was at my door with the police. She was yelling how she rents my driveway and I illegally towed her car. I got the police to speak to me away from her so I could tell them how that wasn't true. I did not rent her the spot and I actually warned her several times to stop parking in my driveway. I showed them the note she left and even pointed out the ruined grass from where she drove onto the lawn and tried to run me over. I just wanted her to leave me alone and I warned her that I was gonna get it towed the next time. She had no evidence, obviously, that she rented the spot from us and there was no contract or proof of money exchanging hands. They told her that I owned the driveway and if I did not want her car there, I had the right to get it towed. She was yelling that she wanted me arrested, but the police here don't take crap like they might in other countries. They arrested her and took her away, basically just to calm down for a while. I guess she got her car back because a few days later I noticed it again. Now, although she was parking it in the street and stopped trying to force her way into my driveway. I heard she tried this with another neighbor but got shut down very quickly there too. She was not gonna just lose quietly though and instead tried to crap talk about me to everybody she could. I don't care what other people think of me, and if they believe the ramblings of a crazy Karen, then I don't want to be associated with them anyway. I know it must have cost her a good amount of money in order to get her car back. She also kept talking crap to my face when I saw her and telling me that really I should have been the one to pay since it was my fault it got towed. I never got into another fight with her again, but instead went back to ignoring her and letting her say what she wanted. In her mind, she is always gonna be right, and I could yell myself blue in the face telling her how she is wrong, but it would not make a difference. I should save my energy for things that are worth it. If she ever tries to park in my driveway again, I'm gonna be calling and getting her towed until she learns her lesson for good. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I'm not sure if people like that will ever learn their lesson. But then again, at some point you would hope they would get it, because I mean, if you get towed and need to get your car back, you need to pay an impound fee, right? At some point that should get expensive, unless this Karen is filthy rich. But either way, if you enjoy the crazy neighbor stories, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support me. Thank you so much. The next one is titled Worst Squatter Ever. Several years ago, my brother Dan moved from California to Washington State and built a 3-bedroom house on one of the 2 parcels of land he had bought when he was 18 years old. He lived in a nice community with a small lake and had an HOA. During the 2008 economic crash, he ran into financial trouble, so we helped him. To repay us for the help in March of 2K16, he came down to California for an extended period to work on our house, which was neglected because of helping him. He was very proficient at renovating houses and did fantastic work. In November, my brother's friend Jake called him and asked if a friend of his, Tuna, could stay in one of the rooms for $400 per month. Dan had worked for many years with Jake doing construction for a house flipper, so he trusted Jake's judgment, needed the money, and thought it might be good to have someone trustworthy there to watch his house. Dan drove back up to Washington, cleaned out a room, put a lock on his bedroom door, locked the door, and put some of his things in a storage area up out of the way in the garage. Tuna seemed nice and gave Dan $400 for the first month. However, there was never a written rental agreement. It was all just verbal and meant to be temporary because Dan was gonna just return in 6 months. Tuna never sent another payment. We would call and ask her and she always said it had been sent, but nothing ever arrived. So what was going on at his house? Well, we pieced together that something wrong was going on there after Dan's neighbor called and after questioning Jake. The neighbor complained that the house had turned into a drug house full of people and cars coming and going all hours of the night. At the beginning of June 2017, Dan drove back to Washington and handed Tuna a 3-day eviction notice. She left stating that she had somewhere else to live and would get her stuff later. He was allowing her to retrieve her stuff at a later date, he just wanted her out. He started working on repairs and cleaning up the house. I mailed Dan a care package with some clothes, a California-themed shopping bag, and gift cards for gas and food. 5 days later, Tuna showed up with 2 men who punched Dan in the face. They wanted to take the house back by force. Dan went to the neighbor and called the police. The police came and instead of arresting the man and Tuna, they took Dan to jail for missing a child support court date, which then put a warrant on him. Before coming to California, he thought everything regarding child support back payments for his independent, successful 23-year-old adult child had been taken care of. He had no idea about a court date since they notify by mail, and Tuna had never forwarded his mail, which was one of the things she promised to do. The child support scam on Dan is another issue I will have to submit later. So the police essentially handed the house over to Tuna. She and her cronies went in, changed the locks and placed a long metal bar across the inside of the garage door so it could not be opened from the outside. They stole the package I sent to Dan and spent the gift cards. Meanwhile, my family and I were on vacation in Hawaii and received a phone call from Dan in jail. I spent a whole day of my vacation in the hotel room trying to figure out how to get him out of jail. Bail bonds could not be used for child support cases. Finally though, they let him out when I paid a child support payment of $350. He had been in jail for 3 days and the squatters had dug themselves in. So when he returned to his house, he had to call the police to arrest them for trespassing. After all, Tuna had been evicted, left, and no longer had permission to be there. They were squatters by all accounts, but the state defers to people who just claim they are renting, therefore requiring a landlord to go through the court system to remove the so-called tenants who are actually squatters. The police then came and screwed him over once again. Tuna claimed she was renting the entire house and the police believed her instead of Dan. She told the policeman that she would leave in 10 days and the policeman told Dan that he could have his house back in 10 days because Tuna said she would leave by then. Are you kidding me? Dan was instructed to leave the premises or be arrested. It was his house. She was the one trespassing. He got into his minivan and drove away with nowhere to stay but in his van. Of course, Tuna did not leave after 10 days. Dan went back after 10 days and called the police again. Once again, the police told him to leave or be arrested. We did not know what to do next. One of the HOA board members who had some experience in managing real estate properties attempted to help us. She said that he needed a 20-day eviction notice and then Tuna would be out, and this had always worked for her when she had to evict tenants. Okay, so the 20-day notice was posted and we waited. Tuna did not leave. Dan then went over to his house and started cleaning up trash strewn all over the yard waiting for her to leave. Tuna called the police stating that she was a renter and that he was disturbing her. Once again, Dan was asked to leave or be arrested. This time Dan put his phone on speaker and I heard the whole interaction between him and the police. Yes, he had to leave or be arrested. Dan could not even get his construction tools out of the garage and could not work without his tools, and with being homeless, how do you even work? What was gonna happen to all of his possessions, his sentimental things, etc.? His room had been broken into long before, his things removed, and people had used the room. It was near the end of the summer and we were paying his mortgage payments and it was getting so hard on everyone. However, then something nice happened. A kind friend, Adam, asked him to stay at his house, which Dan did. During this time, Dan worked for Adam with loaned tools and also went to some landlord/tenant educational meetings. The people at the meetings were helpful and instructed Dan on how to proceed by taking the matter to the court. The police would not go further without a court order to physically evict Tuna. It would be difficult to afford the cost to hire a lawyer, but eventually we did end up getting a lawyer. Dan then posted a court appearance on the door of his house since Tuna never answered the door, and that is what you do legally in this case. Every time he posted a court appearance, he had to legally give her 1 week notice, which he did. He showed up at court and Tuna failed to show up, so he won by default, right? Wrong. The judge said that Tuna was not given proper notice because the notice was posted by Dan instead of an anonymous person. Dan walked out of the courtroom. The lawyers from the landlord/tenant meetings were there and could not believe it. Unfortunately, Adam had to move out of his house he was renting, so Dan had to go back to living in his van. It was autumn in the Pacific Northwest and getting cold. The police had started harassing him if he slept in his van. We rented motel rooms for Dan. Once while at a motel, Dan heard a knock on the door in the middle of the night. He thought it was the motel staff and he opened the door. However, 2 men burst into the room, proceeded to beat the crap out of him to rob him. They broke his finger and gave him a concussion. Dan ran to his van, drove it to a parking lot and slept. He refused to go back to the motel. Things were starting to go downhill from there in a very bad way. I found a lawyer from a non-profit who worked for free to help. He actually used that 3-day eviction notice that Dan had given Tuna back in June as a basis for the case. I had found it online, the wording was appropriate and it had been served properly. The lawyer had to jump through endless hoops and court appearances. The same judge presided over every case that had to do with evictions and she always favored the tenants, including entitled ones. This took forever, like 3 more months, and Dan became haggard, homeless, sick, depressed, and at times had gone missing. Once I called every hospital, jail, homeless shelter, etc. and even the food bank looking for him. His van was impounded 4 times and he was hospitalized 4 times. He was endlessly hunted down and harassed by the police. 3 times I found him because I was listed as his emergency contact on his state insurance when he showed up at hospitals. While all of this was happening to Dan, my husband was in a serious motorcycle accident and I had to take care of my husband, changing his dressings, etc. Okay, I am crying right now, and this was so hard to endure, remember, and difficult to write about. I also could not leave and fly up to Washington to help my brother, but I was doing everything down here to get his house back with the lawyer. I got him motel rooms at other motels when I could. I paid 4 times to get his van out of impound. I sent him cell phones and care packages delivered at UPS stores. One time Dan was lost and did not have his van or phone. He ended up at a hospital who contacted me. He told me that he had felt really sick and had gone to the hospital earlier, who released him after examining him. Even after he pleaded with them to let him stay because he felt sick, he ended up collapsing on the sidewalk by the Salvation Army shelter, who would not let him in, and another homeless person called 911. So he was back at that hospital with a serious condition affecting his heart. I told the hospital to please call me at release time so I could arrange a motel for Dan. However, they didn't. He was then found in a park in frigid weather, dressed in a pair of scrubs, a t-shirt, a hoodie, and one shoe. A city policeman called me and took him to a motel where he stayed a while. I sent a care package there. Dan told me that one time when he was being harassed by the police for cooking food in a park, he mouthed off and told them they were communist and it was their fault that he was homeless because they gave his house to a squatter. Then a fire truck arrived and he was not arrested with the firemen there, but I don't think the police liked him much for saying that. In October, Dan was arrested for drunk driving while he was sleeping in a Walmart parking lot. I had to bail him out of jail over that, and every time he didn't get to court hearings, they would post warrants for his arrest. One time he was in jail and they refused to give him his medication, so I had to bail him out because he felt so awful. In mid-November, the police arrested Dan again for not showing up to court for that so-called drunk driving incident. He begged me to bail him out. Even though the bail bondsman paid the bail in the late afternoon, the jail released him in the middle of the night, again with no vehicle, impounded, a dead cell phone, no charger, in the van, no money, etc. I found out later that this jail only releases people at night so they can get credit and are paid by the state for the whole day. Which, by the way, guys, seems corrupt as hell. But anyway, that night he was released. It was our deceased mother's birthday. Dan was then found unconscious in a ditch by a seawall in a Starbucks parking lot. He had a broken femur, broken hip, cracked spine, a head concussion, and that finger was still broken from the motel incident. The doctors evaluated that he had been hit in the back of his head with a blunt object. We don't know who did it. The last thing he remembers was a police car driving by. He was then airlifted to a major hospital in Seattle, about 50 miles from where he was. I took a flight up to Seattle as soon as I could and visited him. The doctors showed me the x-rays and he had countless rods and pins put into his body to put him back together. By this time, we were getting closer to having his house back. I went by the house with Adam's brother-in-law, Paul, who was packing heat. We pounded on the door and I demanded that the squatters hand over my dead mother's rocking chair. The stupid friend Jake was there and he handed it through the door. It's a big heirloom mission-style chair and they had burned into the chair in 4 letters the word wasted. The court order finally became available, but by then we had to schedule the eviction according to when the police had time to do it, which was another 2 weeks. It was scheduled for the beginning of December. I then went back home to California briefly and returned the night of the eviction. Dan was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks now. When he was released, I arranged a nice long-term stay type hotel back near home for him to live at until the police evict the squatters. Paul helped us a lot. He was with the police at the eviction time and changed all the locks and secured the house. He picked up Dan at the hotel and Dan got to witness the eviction of that entitled woman from hell. She was the only one left in the house. A notice had been posted on the door to warn everyone to leave, but as usual, she did not think there would be any reason she would have to leave. It took her completely by surprise. The police pounded on the door and demanded she leave immediately. She asked if she could get this and that, but no, she couldn't. She grabbed her little dog purse and left with nothing else. The police put a notice on the door after Paul secured everything. Dan was driven back to the hotel and then I arrived. I wish I could have seen the eviction, but could not get a flight early enough. The neighbors said that a bunch of people came to the house that night pounding on the door trying to get in, but couldn't. They almost called the police, but the people then left. We went over there every day for about a week to clean up. Dan was unfortunately confined to a wheelchair and was on heavy meds, so it was hard. He could not help too much, but he did his best. The house was a disaster. There was literally 5 tons of garbage in the yards around the house. The trash disposal service was not activated during this time, so they just piled it up around the house. On one side of the house was a huge pillar of trash made out of wire fencing. It was about 8 feet by 8 feet and at least 12 feet high. The front yard was awful, with several piles of trash about 4 feet high. Tuna left every single thing in the kitchen, in the cupboards, and rotting food in pans. The carpets were soaked in dog pee. There were clothes and junk everywhere. There was loads of crushed glass embedded into the gravel driveway like she wanted us to get flat tires. Over the doorway from the house into the garage was a dangerous booby trap which literally could have killed someone. It was made out of large heavy metal clamps with a glass jewelry case tethering on top of the clamps. It could have easily fallen on top of someone's head if not discovered, and someone jarred it a little. The water had been shut off for months by the HOA because they controlled the well and owned the water system. As soon as you don't pay the HOA fees, water is shut off. All the toilets were clogged up with crap. The sewage system was impossible to unclog, and later DB discovered that they had thrown dirt and plastic containers down the pipes. He had to go under the house and disassemble the pipes to get everything out. Hanging up on the wall in plain sight in the master bedroom was the California shopping bag I had mailed to Dan in the package that Tuna had stolen. She hung it there to taunt me. By the way, I'm not super religious, but I felt the worst kind of evil there and had to pray and debunk the evil spirits from that house. I stayed for weeks there cleaning up and hired some people to do yard clean out to get the front yard clean. Later on, Dan and Adam dealt with the pillar of trash at the side of the house. Every construction tool that belonged to Dan was stolen. He could not work much from a wheelchair but needed the tools to repair his own house. However, Dan persisted. He finally got to the point where he could walk. Now, he cannot walk for long periods, gets tired easily, but can do things slowly. He has some nice roommates that drive him places and take care of him at times. Many of his tools have been replaced though. He sanded off the wasted message on Mom's rocking chair. We have sunk a lot of money into helping him, but what else is one supposed to do? It was a life or death situation. That was his house he had built so many years ago. This was the most wicked thing I've ever encountered. It was coming from all directions. We heard that the creepy squatter died a year later. No one wanted to take her in, and she went from person to person, staying wherever. And ripe stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and if you did, I would very much appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and maybe leave a comment as well as like the video if you enjoy my content. Thank you so much in advance, and I will see you again tomorrow.